The Radio Whammo Breakfast.
Talking politics with Russell Norman.
Co-leader of the Greens. It's been a week of politics. Good morning to you, Russell.
Good morning, Whammo.
Good morning. Now, let's settle this this whether or not Gillard can talk in Parliament business. What were the Greens getting at when you objected to her talking during parliamentary time?
So the issue was whether she addressed us while Parliament was in session, or whether addressed us when Parliament was not in session. So the Greens argued strongly that it should be when Parliament is not in session, and the reason for that is that we think it's an important principle, which the New Zealand Parliament's had for a century or whatever, that only elected representatives are on the floor of the House during a parliamentary session, in order to draw a line around our democracy and our elected representatives. That's also the case in the US Congress. It's also the case in the United Kingdom, and we just think it's a good principle to stick to.
And in fact, you guys announced that you wouldn't support during sitting time quite a few months ago, didn't you?
Yeah, this debate happened on the Business Committee of Parliament last year when Rudd was supposed to come, and then it was suddenly cancelled because he was rolled by Gillard.
Right.
And yeah, we discussed it then. I mean, it's I don't think it's a big deal, but for us it was an important point of principle, and we found a compromise which works for everyone, which is Julia Gillard addresses the Parliament today, but it's not in session.
And you're also saying that it could have set a precedent that other leaders around the world would then expect to talk during sitting time as well.
That's right. I mean, if the Australian Prime Minister addresses the New Zealand Parliament during sitting time, then it would be difficult to turn down the US President. It would be difficult to turn down the Chinese President. And we may find ourselves in a situation where basically the government of the day feels like it can't say no to people that a lot of New Zealanders are very uncomfortable having in a democratically elected chamber, because in the case of the Chinese president, I mean, he's an enemy of democracy, basically.
Or it could be a dickhead like George Bush, who's pro-democracy.
Well, exactly. When George Bush addressed a House in Australia, which has broken with precedent and does allow heads of state and heads of government to address the Parliament in session, actually it was a real problem over there.
Yeah. Okay. And no problem with John Key on this one? It sounds like he actually agrees, but I don't know why he didn't make the move himself.
No, National did want the Australian Prime Minister to address Parliament in session, so we've come under enormous pressure, in fact, from National and to a less degree Labor about this, but we just stood our ground. We thought it was important, so we stood it.
Because, of course, you could have stood up and objected, and she would have had to have sat down, right?
It's a little bit unclear, actually, how it might have panned out, but we think this is a good compromise which works to protect our democracy, and we like Australians. We're happy to have Julia talk to MPs at Parliament. Apparently,
we have lots of mateship going on between the two countries.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, there is some concern, though, from you yesterday in Parliament about the possibility of state-owned assets being partially privatised. We're of course talking about the power companies, and about whether or not overseas investors could get first dibs on those shares, and whether or not this agreement between Australia and New Zealand could, in fact, allow Australian buyers to buy into these assets as well. So you've got some concern around that. What was some of the answers that you were able to get yesterday?
Yeah. I mean, the basic issue is the National have said that if they go ahead with the privatisation of the electricity companies, that New Zealanders will get first go at buying the shares. Now, putting aside the question of there's a lot of New Zealanders who don't have any money, so it's completely irrelevant, but let's just take that argument on face value. There's a lot of investment treaties that specifically outlaw such an approach, because they say actually you've got to treat investors equally regardless of where they reside, whether they're New Zealanders, Australians or whatever. So what we were questioning them on yesterday was, well, if you're going to sign this investment protocol with Australia, how can you guarantee that when these assets are privatised, that New Zealanders get first go at buying the shares when, generally speaking, investment treaties rule out such preferential treatment? The answers we got were that we'll find out when it's signed, pretty much.
Right. Okay, so we'll roll the dice and see what happens.
Well, it's classic. So this is how it always works with these investment treaties and other trade treaties, is that the government of the day signs them before the people of the country ever get a chance to see what's in them, which is just deeply offensive and undemocratic.
Which sounds a bit like free trade deals as well. Sort of, well, we'll sign this thing off and then see what happens.
Exactly. The Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations underway at the moment. The other countries' governments have seen the offers New Zealand has made, where we've offered to open borders and basically restrict government's ability to regulate. But the New Zealand people themselves haven't seen what powers we're proposing to give away forever. But the other governments we're negotiating with, but New Zealand people have no idea because the government won't tell us.
Russel Norman, co-leader of the Greens, thanks very much for your time.
Cheers, very much.
Here's a track now from Solar Rosa. This is called The